say it's more in production. I think when you're making a film, at least from my experience, I end up making 3 films. I write one film that I think is the film, and then there we have it. And then I shoot a film, and I think, oh, that's the film. Now I know what it is. And then really, it's the 3rd film that I make in the process, which is the one I make with the editor, the one that I share with you all, which is the film. And I would say, thank you. This thing just went up. Production is where you discover the kind of texture and the tone of the film. And there were just moments when we made the movie, the decisions had to be made about what kind of film. And I think in a way, when I'm writing the script, and I write with Mauricio Zacharias, this is our 5th film we've done together. I'm really trying to make something that feels and sounds authentic, because that makes it easier to act in a certain way. But when I was shooting, when I was getting ready for pre-production, and we were in pre-production, there were certain moments, particularly around the wardrobe, where there were decisions to be made, like, for example, with Adele Exarchopoulos, back and forth. We had one rack of clothes, which were the elementary school teacher in a Parisian school that you might see in a subway, very ordinary, and then we had the other rack of clothes, which we basically called Brigitte Bardot's clothes. And we chose the Bardot. Like, there was a moment where we said, we're making a movie, let's play, and let's take impact from color, form, shape, and cinematic beauty. And so then everything kind of was liberated in a certain way. I also, working with Jose Dahai, the cinematographer, at a certain point, who I just love the collaboration we had together and her work, there was a point when I said to her and Marianne Mamour, who was the name of her gaffer, who was a wonderful woman with a wonderful name, I said, like, let's really look at images in which lighting is always emotion. So we were very conscious to try to, maybe without people noticing, but always think of light as cinematic emotion. So those are the kinds of things that were kind of happening really primarily in production.
You and Mauricio are writing, you said you've written together several projects now. Is it you come to him with the initial idea and bad ideas around from that? I'm really curious because you have this long-standing writing collaboration now. Is it always the same in terms of how you two write?
At this point, it is. We have something that works. Only one script we wrote didn't work. Like, we were just like, something went wrong. But and I can actually say where that happened. But what we do is we meet, and I do bring the idea. I bring something, some instinct, but if he really didn't like the idea, there'd be nowhere to go. Like, we'd be done, and we'd have to come up. So when I bring an idea to him, I'm kind of like, is he gonna get excited about this? And then we spend about 3 or 4 months working on an outline of the film that's quite thorough, character driven. We also, to get that outline, we're watching a lot of movies. All our movies are remakes, to be honest. I don't always say that, but I figure why not. So if you've seen Love is Strange, it's a remake of Make Way for Tomorrow. If you've seen Little Men, it's a remake of 2 Ozu films, Good Morning and I Was Born But. This film is very influenced by late Visconti, the last film called The Innocent, which is about an aristocratic man who has a woman who's his mistress and also a woman who's his wife, and he thinks he's in love with his mistress, but actually he falls in love with his wife who no longer is in love with him. So the structure of that was really interesting to us. And so we get to the point that we have a pretty thorough set of scenes and characters and what's gonna happen, and then he goes off and writes the first draft. He does what I consider the heavy lifting, which is like, can be 7 or 8 months. It's a long process, and I kind of have to wait and twiddle my thumbs. And then he comes back, and that's actually where we are now with the new film. And then it becomes eventually my script. And my script, as I said, is really changing with production and casting and locations and things like that. I didn't have Franz ride a bike like he did. And so that's why we rewrote the end based on what I saw, which is the crazy bike rider Franz Rudkowski. So that's an example.
You have mentioned for Franz.
Yes.
How early in that writing process were you thinking, and you've mentioned that you saw him in Happy End, the Mike Haneke film, but I'm curious, was it from the very, very beginning, like just thinking, it's a guy kind of like this actor in terms of sort of conceiving who Tomas was?
You know, it's sort of like there's a lot of people I've seen in my life that I get excited by. So there's like a storage of. So it's not like I see Franz Rogowski and think I'm gonna write a film for that guy. It's more like I have seen Franz Rogowski and he's in my mind. He's kind of certain. I think of certain experiences I've had in cinema that are like enlarging my family. Like they become part of my family. Franz Rogowski in Happy End. If you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to, because it's a movie and you don't feel like it, but and it's a very good movie, but if you don't feel like watching the whole thing, go home, go on YouTube, type in Franz Rogowski, Sia Chandelier. Because what he performs in Happy End is a karaoke performance of Sia Chandelier, and it's really like, it's cinema at its finest. And it's because of him. He's really like a beast. In a way that you'll say like, oh, I know why that guy made a film for that guy. So then once I go like, this idea is good for Franz Rogowski, he is our muse. But it doesn't always mean that he ends up, the person ends up doing the film, which is fine. I mean, it's a little bit disappointing, it has happened to me. But because they've actually inspired the writing, whether they're in the film or not. In this case, he wanted to do the film, and I did not tell him when I sent him the script that I'd written it for him. I waited until he wanted to do the movie, and then I told him.
So what was his reaction when you told him after he said yes? He said, oh, by the way, you were the muse for this.
You know, he'd have to kind of answer that. I think he was flattered, but not surprised.
All three of your movies are just terrific in this movie. I wanted to ask a little bit about Adele Exarchopoulos because it was a surprise, at least for me, to find out that you had not seen Blue is the Warmest Color. Now, she has done a lot of great work, and unfortunately, a lot of it has not come to the U.S., but I think arguably in the U.S., that's perhaps the movie that she's most well known for. But you had not seen it, so in terms of what drew you to her and thought she would be right, what were the films that she had done that?
You know, it's interesting, it doesn't take much, like Franz in that Happy End movie, he's not the lead, he probably has 25 minutes in the movie, and that was enough. I saw Adele in Justine Trier's Sybil, the film she made just before winning the Golden Ball. I was just really like, just caught watching her. I didn't watch any of the rest of the movie, I just watched her. And I came out of the theater and I was like, who is that person? And when this movie was planned for Paris, she was the first person that we went to with Ben. You know, there's a lot of things I've missed of Ben, but I happened to see him play Bob Dylan in Todd Haynes' I'm Not There, and I've just never forgotten the performance. So it was just, he's like, oh, we should go to that guy. So that's often how it works. And I think Adele, for me, she's like, she's better than I could have imagined. I didn't know what she could do in this role. I still haven't seen Blue is the Warmest Color. Because she's like this really fascinating combination between, in a way, the real and the unreal. I think of it as the earth and the sky. Because she's really part of everyday life in a certain way, but she's also has this thing which I think you could, Jean Moreau had the same thing, which is like there's some extraordinary mystery that draws you to her. That is, she's never quite fully always there, which is in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to describe it. Kind of on-screen presence. There's something that's not, you can't entirely kind of put your hands around it, yeah.
Someone told me it's kind of the definition of a cool girl, is there's always something naked that they're doing that you're not invited to. And I think she has that, but in a very kind way. She has almost no cruelty in her.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'm really interested in is that for this movie, you didn't do much in the way of rehearsal, which is interesting to me because it's so about the dynamic between the three characters.
Strategically, it's not a money or a time issue. It's just something that I, in the 30 years that I've been making films, have figured out what works for me. And there's different ways that people can do things. So for me, I'm really trying to avoid conversation about certain things that you would have in a rehearsal. So I don't want to talk about subtext, and I don't want to talk about motivation. And I also don't want the actors to hear what the other actors are doing with the words before you start shooting, because then they start to imagine in advance what they're going to hear. And the same if you talk about like what something means, or what they might, their intention, for example, is a word of an acting word, then they might, because you've spoken it, they might try to play that. And then they're actually simplifying things in a way that I'm not interested in, or trying not to. But I want a different atmosphere. I want an atmosphere that has risk, that has trust, and that also has the possibility of failure. I think it's really important to be in a situation where that's okay. That might happen too. Like, for example, the sex scenes in the film, I'm kind of the only person who knows. I don't even, maybe the actors know, like, if they didn't happen in that moment, that day, really that take, then it wouldn't exist in the film. Like, you'd have to live without it. It's very central to the film, but it might not have happened also. And that's the kind of atmosphere that I think with these three actors was exciting. It's also not unique. It's very much a part of the history of European filmmaking, which is often less theatrical than American filmmaking by structure in a certain way.
Just in the US, I feel like in terms of what happened to sensuality in movies, what happened to sex in movies, it used to be part of what movies were about, and we see less and less of it in movies. You had a quote about you wanted to make a horny movie, but when you were writing it, when you were conceiving it, was that from the beginning an idea of, were you missing the fact that there isn't much sex in movies anymore, and wanted to rectify that in some way?
Well, that's like a larger question. Like, you could say, what happened to good movies? I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, whether what you think, like, what happened to movies that were made for adults? Like, why does everyone think that movies made for, like, why are adults going to so many movies that are kind of kid-like? Like, so and I think that there becomes this idea of things getting simpler and simpler and simpler, so in a way, I'm just trying to sort of exist in a history of the things that I've loved. And that's what I really wanted to make. I also wanted to make a film of pleasure. I would say more than sex. I would say I wanted to make a pleasurable film. So skin is pleasurable, color is pleasurable, good acting. Like, I wanted to make the opportunity. I did think about Cassavetes for the first time. Like, I used to really think about Cassavetes when I was young, and I sort of haven't, but I wanted people to I wanted to have intimacy in these performances and create that as really what almost is the subject of the film.
Yeah. Franz has talked about the fact that when he first saw the movie, he was surprised because, I forget how he sort of put it, it was like, the scenes were longer when we shot them, but it was more kind of condensed. And one of the things I really love about Passages is it feels like the editing has a purpose behind it. It's moving. And was when you were going to edit and making the third version of your movie, essentially, was that sort of a decision where it's like, let's make these scenes a little shorter, let's just sort of do the middle and then move on to the next scene?
That actually, and I haven't heard that quote of Franz's, I'm curious about it, and I understand what he's saying, because it's also his experience is actually, you shoot for a full day for one or two scenes, so you spend a long time on things that end up just being short. So, but really I would say from the writing stage, I think of this film, and maybe all of my films, is a series of middles. So I don't think of scenes as having beginning, middles, and ends. I try to avoid that in the writing. I'm interested in ellipses. I'm interested in I'm totally used to the fact that the audience might feel disoriented for like a good 20-25 minutes of the film, because that disorientation means the world exists and you're not quite in it yet. And part of what you're doing when you're watching the film is slowly becoming central. And it usually, with almost all my films, I can actually point to the moment, though if you asked me what it was in this film, I couldn't tell you. But I can point to the moment where suddenly I feel like the audience is inside. But I'm okay with that taking a little while. And part of that is I want people to have suspense. Like, that's an element. I mean, I over the pandemic with my kids, we watched 17 Hitchcock movies, and Hitchcock and Patricia Highsmith, and these things are actually really important to me because I feel like I'm making an action film and I'm making a suspense
is that something that you tell your actors? You said you didn't want to talk about like motivation and things, but do you describe it as, we're making an action movie?
No. No.
So how do you then, I guess?
I just tell them like run down the stairs with a bike. I mean, really what I think of what I do, I think the actors, I will say, like, I don't want to imply that when I don't rehearse, that we just go like, good luck, have fun, but do your best. We block. I spent 6 weeks with the cinematographer working 3 or 4 hours a day to strategize the shooting of the film. I storyboard the film before we start shooting. So I'm very prepared for that chaos. And I think the actors feel that, so they don't feel like there's no direction. They just know they have freedom. And often when you give actors freedom, they don't take it. That's what's kind of interesting. I'm always like, if you want to walk into the light, you can, and then they never do. But occasionally things break, like in the lunch scene with the parents. That's scripted until the moment when Franz leaves the table, and in this one take, he came back. It only happened once. But the feeling that maybe something is happening that could change in the moment, and again, watch Husbands by Cassavetes. Like you feel the whole movie could go in any direction you want at any moment. And that's the kind of feeling that I'm trying to kind of convey in the texture of the film. But actually it doesn't need to happen all the time. If it happens 2 or 3 times in the film, the rest of the film has that feeling of freedom.
Like, at least on social media, people are absolutely obsessed with Tomas's kind of outfits, and especially like, just use one example when he goes back and sleeps with Martin, and then goes to meet Adele's parents, and he's wearing the same outfit. It's just like the perfectly awfulest outfit. My understanding is that it was a bit of a collaboration in terms of figuring out Tomas's costumes. How did that kind of come about?
Well, everything is a collaboration, and that was a wonderful one with Hadija Zagai, a costume designer, and the actors. I mean, she's bringing things, and I'm showing her certain. I mean, really, like I'm showing her Beware of the Holy Whore, Fassbender's film, because of the costumes, not because of what happens in the movie. I don't really know what happens in the movie. And I'm showing her Sandrine Bonnaire and Inez Amour, specifically like the color red, and I'm saying like, get excited. Let's do things that we're excited about. And then she's kind of coming up with this incredible wardrobe. The green sweater is from her closet. So she was also, and the little midriff was a woman's piece, and I said, I think you should try this on. She's like, really? I'm like, and then, by the way, he looks really good in it. Like that's this thing, that's encouraging too. So we're trying on clothes, and to me, the trying on clothes is actually a form of rehearsal. A, because you're figuring out who the person is, the armor. Yeah. And B, you're having a good time together. And that's really significant. We were in Hadija's house, we're like having tea and crumpets, and the actors are, 2 or 3 of the actors are there, and it's really warm to be doing that. At some point, Franz said to me, I've never worked on a film where I've spent as much time working on the costumes. And what was interesting, even as I'm saying it to you, I had this instant feeling of 2 things at the same time. I felt proud because I was working really hard, and I felt total shame as a homosexual. Because I thought, you're really saying I'm thinking too much about clothes. And I felt like, I don't know, is that a good thing? There's interesting moments that happen when you're trying on things. And with Franz, I will say, I mean, there's some things I can take credit for and some things I can't, but I can say, I remember so clearly when people talk about him coming in with that midriff. For me, what happened, and I did make the decision to use that clothes, is I realized as I was looking at the calendar where he'd be wearing things, that if he wore that midriff to seduce Ben, then he would have it at home. And so you weigh, what I'm recognizing is that clothes are a prop, right? Like that they can tell a story, and that they can carry that story through these scenes.
I'd like to open up to the audience. It's a question about the Cirque poster. Series of books. Let's try the series of books poster that's on the wall, and this idea about self-censorship. Was that something that was at the script level? Was that something that happened during the filming? It seems like it's a comment going on in the film.
You know, I try to avoid commenting, like in general, with almost everything. Like I'm like, if you point, they'll see you pointing. So I try not to do that. It seemed to me like they're a queer couple. it's also a beautiful painting, it's got a lot of color. It didn't really represent anything particular, but actually, as I say it on point, and I try to, in a way, avoid metaphor comes out of the film anyway. And so these things have meaning that in a way I almost pretend don't exist when I'm putting them together to make the film. For example, there is a clown, you know, a Watteau painting in a Gott's apartment, which becomes quite, it's always there, right? So that's significant in some ways. And, but I basically try to respond instinctually to what I'm looking at in the film and what we used.
Anyone else? Of the other two characters to Tomas in terms of the different betrayals that he does during the movie. Was that a conscious choice to make them a little more muted in terms of their reactions to him?
You know, maybe it's like I made a Parisian film, a European film, but I'm from Memphis. And when I hear you say that, because to me there's nothing, and other people have said, I feel like that the film avoids histrionics, it avoids like any heightened emotion, but not for me. I have to say, like that's just, I feel so much emotion. I feel like from basically 20 minutes in, everything is going down, and there is this like sense of like intensity between these people that plays out in ways that is really marked on the film. Like you can feel the emotion, but it's not, I guess they're not, I don't know. It's like literally, I don't exactly know what you're talking about, but enough people have told me that I can believe it. So I think it probably has a little bit to do with me. Like what I'm used to and when I write is kind of the tone in which pain maybe comes through in my own life. I would guess.
And one other thing, I wanted to congratulate you on standing firm on your vision for your film against the ratings war. Because I'm worried about, I'm doing a film as well, but as soon as this project's over, we're gonna get busy, but I'm worried about the same thing in my film with the sensuality that's gonna be portrayed in our film. So kudos for standing up as well as your distributor back as you.
Yes, thank you to the movie.
Just actually, because the compliment was about standing firm in terms of the contents and just going out unrated simply because they're rated NC-17. But I was actually curious, just real fast to ask, when you were filming it, was that even a consideration for you about what's this thing going to be rated? Did you worry about?
I worried that people wouldn't buy it, but I wasn't worried about the rating. You know, I have to say for me, to be honest, the rating has not personally affected me or the film in any way. I made a free film, I sold a free film, I'm distributing a free film, and there was never even 30 seconds that there was a discussion of doing anything else. Also, it wouldn't, what could you do? Like it's a film about sexuality and intimacy, and that's in every frame, so I don't think there was anything to cut. But I'm really worried about the chilling effect that these kind of things have on people like yourself who are making a film. It's like, it's basically a warning shot to say don't create images like this or you're gonna be punished. Like it is punishment. So that concerns me.
Anyone creating a very selfish character who's maybe not necessarily likable, but at the same time we're able to relate to Tomas in certain ways.
Well, it's a good question, and I think, you know, the history of film is filled with men behaving badly. It's basically like one of the prime stories of film and also literature and drama. So I think I didn't ever question whether or not it would be okay. I mean, I think at some point early on, Franz did. He said, "Can I really get away with this?" And I showed him 2 films with James Cagney, so White Heat and Public Enemy, and then we didn't have to talk about it because he's so incredibly charismatic and beautiful in those films, and he plays a sociopath, and he does really terrible things, and it's wonderful. And part of it is that 2 things: one, he's doing things that the audience can't do, so there's the pleasure of watching people behave badly and kind of like breaking norms right and left. And then the other thing is it's a performance. Like you're feeling that there is Tomas, but there's also Franz Rogalski, who is a charming, beautiful, fun to look at, energetic, passionate person. So it's a kind of vaudeville. If this was Donald Trump, you wouldn't be able to watch the film. Really, like it would be repellent in a different kind of way. And I think that that's important. I mean, I mean that because there's that gap between, and the other thing that Franz would say is that Tomas is actually, in some ways, always trying to please people. He's not really, to me, he might be a sociopath, but I don't think he's a narcissist. So.
And I think it's an important discussion. I think there is something that is not self-aware about him. That is part of what makes him exasperated, but also why people want to take care of him. Because there's almost like they can feel that in him in some way.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, there's a couple of people, I mean, I'm certainly in that character. I'm certainly in the character. I also know people who are actually closer models to the character, and I both can think of those people as Pied Pipers that I want to follow, and also people I never want to see again. Like, those are both, that's true, both those things.
Ira, thank you so much for the film and for being here. Thank you all. Have a good night.